Hello, welcome to my booktube, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Bethanne, and I finally finished The Count of Monte Cristo. Oh, those are my notes. The Count of Monte Cristo. I started this on March 1st. I was reading it as part of a group organized by Summer over at Cozy Reading with Quaker Cats, so I will link to her channel below. And I think everybody finished it before me except for maybe one other person, so I should check in with her. Our Voxer channel has gotten a little quiet since most people finished it. It took me from March 1st until May 19th to read this book. Not because I didn't love it. I actually ended up rating this 5 stars on Goodreads. I think technically it's probably a 4.5 star book for me. There are a few things that annoyed me, and I do ultimately think it is longer than it needs to be. But that said, I mean, I ended up loving this book. I was a little bit hesitant about it in my April wrap up. So if anybody watched that video, I was complaining about The Count of Monte Cristo a little bit, still really enjoying it. But at that point I was predicting a 4-star read. And I think I had just hit 1,000 pages, and my edition is 1,462 pages. So I did still have a ways to go. And I actually really ended up liking the end of the story. So I think in my April wrap up, one of the things I had complained about was that in the beginning of the book, we are really made to love Dantes, the main character. And I should have opened by saying this is going to be pretty spoiler filled. I don't want to limit myself. So if you haven't read this book and are intending to, stop watching. If you've read this book, or if you're familiar enough with it from pop culture, then you might enjoy this video. But anyway, I really felt like, the first part of the book was very character driven. We really empathized with Dantes and felt what he went through. And then once he sort of resurfaces as the Count of Monte Cristo and it's just revenge, 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 it's like, that's a great story. But it's also, we don't actually see who he is. All we see really is how events unfold from the standpoint of all of the side characters, the people against whom he's seeking revenge, but also their family and loved ones. And we don't actually see Monte Cristo. And the way it sort of comes together at the end is we do get a little bit more of, like, he is just so consumed by revenge. That is just all he is. And I think for hundreds of pages, I kept expecting to just like see a little bit more. I mean, if you have $100 million, I'm going to say dollars, whatever the currency was. If you have 100 million, there's got to be more to your life than revenge, right? Like, please. And so it was really sad that there wasn't. And so I finally sort of got with the program and like, okay, he's totally bent on revenge. And then he does have a bit of a redemption arc towards the end of the book. He sort of realizes, oh dear, I've gone too far. My actions are actually hurting people who don't deserve what's happening to them. And so that sort of frames some of the action towards the end of the book. And he has a bit of a redemption sort of in that way. And in at the very end of the book, there's at least some hope that he can reclaim a more positive facing life instead of a negative facing life. So that did really sort of improve the book for me. Still could have been shorter, but that's okay. So anyway, what do I want to talk about today? So this is not really a review. This is more of just like a gush/rant, and now maybe more on a rant. So I wanted to go through just a couple of my tabs, and then I have a few topics on which I'm going to rant. So tab number 1. So in my edition, this is the Modern Library Classics edition. This is page 113 for any nerds who want to follow along, in chapter 11, The Corsican Ogre. So just a super minor point. So Louis the 13th is sort of talking about what's happened, and so he sort of is talking about how Napoleon was overthrown, and he says, now I've studied, analyzed, I've gotten everything that was promised to me. I've attained the end of all my wishes. The power I hold in my hand bursts and shatters me to atoms. And I just had a moment of like, did we know about the atom in 1844? Like, no, we did not. So for a second I was like, is this The Simpsons? Like, is this pop culture that is predicting the future? So I had to look that up. So I did not know that the word atom is from Democritus, I guess like ancient Greek, and just means something that's indivisible. And so that word has been in usage for a long time. And what I was thinking of is sort of our modern conception of the atom, as something that we can, measure as a unit. We can count them, right? And so that sort of wasn't like described and discovered until the end of the 1800s. So I just thought that was funny that I had a moment of like, what is going on here? Okay, then another funny tab. So this is on page 439 in my edition, which is in the chapter called the Colosseum. This is chapter 35. So everyone in the action of the story at this point is in Rome. Albert de Morcerf, who is, sorry for my pronunciation, who is the son of Fernand, who was one of the traitors who betrayed Dantes at the beginning of the book and has now achieved fame and fortune. So Albert is a rich young man. He's hanging out with Monte Cristo and some other people in Rome. And Albert, being like a 22-year-old guy or whatever, has like come to Rome convinced that he's going to have lots of love affairs. And it's not happening. And so I just really enjoyed the passage about that. So I'm going to, bear with me, I'm just going to read it for a minute. Sometimes Albert would affect to make a joke of his want of success, but internally he was deeply wounded, and his self-love immensely piqued to think that Albert de Morcerf, the most admired and most sought after of any young person of his day, should thus be passed over and merely have his labor for his pains. And the thing was so much the more annoying as, according to the characteristic modesty of a Frenchman, Albert had quitted Paris with the full conviction that he had only to show himself in Italy to carry all before him, and that upon his return he should astonish the Parisian world with the recital of his numerous love affairs. Alas, poor Albert, none of those interesting adventures fell in his way. The lovely Genoese, Florentine, and Neapolitan females were all faithful, if not to their husbands, at least to their lovers, and thought not of changing even for the splendid appearance of Albert de Morcerf. And all he gained was the painful conviction that the ladies of Italy have this advantage over those of France, that they are faithful even in their infidelity. So I really liked that because he's in Rome and like all the women of his social class are sleeping with people that they're not married to, and they just don't want him. I thought that was funny. Okay, so what were some of my other tabs? Okay, so now we're getting into a couple of my gripes. So one other thing, this is minor, but just a section of the book, like a couple hundred pages, is sort of obsessed with duels. This Albert kid sort of goes off and wants to duel everybody. His father is insulted, and so then therefore he's insulted, and so there's a lot of drama around that. He wants to basically Monte Cristo has sort of revealed the secret of some of his father's like betrayals and machinations in the past to the press, and so the father, Fernand, is going to get ruined. It's Monte Cristo's revenge coming to fruition, and Albert is pissed off about it. And so the solution is dueling, and it's just like, I know it was a cultural thing. I know it was of the time, yada, yada, but it's still just that idea that a verbal insult, like even if you're going to lose your fortune, and like, God forbid, this nobleman would have to work for his living, right? I mean, like, it's a verbal insult. He might lose his fortune. Like, obviously that is important enough to risk losing your life for, and killing somebody for. Like, I just don't understand the duels. I'm thankful I was born in the time I was born in. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about feminism in the Count of Monte Cristo. So if you don't like people complaining about the ways women are treated in old books, this might not be the rest of the video for you. So a couple of things. So one thing that sort of bugged me was eventually the Count of Monte Cristo has a confrontation with Mercedes, the love of his life, who he was slated to marry, and on the eve of his wedding he was betrayed and thrown into prison for essentially a made-up crime by these three evil people that he spends 1,500 pages trying to get revenge on. So Mercedes was totally innocent in all of that, and she's just a working class girl. She's a fisherman's daughter. But Monte Cristo sort of lumps her in a little bit because she didn't wait for him, and he sort of confronts her with that. He's like, well, you didn't, she says, Well, I didn't know. Like, I had no idea that the guy I ended up marrying was one of the guys who fed you to the wolves. Like, how was I supposed to know? Obviously, he's not going to tell me. And Monte Cristo says, well, you didn't wait for me. And she's like, I thought you were dead. Like, what do you expect me to do? And it's just so ridiculous because it's like, of course she couldn't. I mean, we are talking about a poor woman who was by herself. Her family was dead. In, at that time, 1815 in France. And she was part of a minority in France. She's a Catalan. Um, from the Catalan region of Spain. Like, she's not, like, what is wrong with you, dude? And so he does sort of get over that, and there's um, sort of an understanding between them towards the end of the book. But it was a little bit like, I can understand being sad, Monte Cristo, but like, you don't get to be mad at her about this. This is ridiculous. She's just doing what she sort of has to do to survive in her society and her culture. So I didn't like that. Okay, then the other thing is Valentine de Villefort, who is the daughter of Villefort, who's sort of the up-and-coming judge in 1815, who throws Dantes in prison forever by sort of lying and hiding sort of the real story. And so he's a major player in why Dantes is put away. And so he's one of the main people that Dantes is seeking revenge for. And so the way that Dantes goes about seeking revenge is he sort of encourages Villefort's second wife to become a poisoner and poison uh, several people in the family, including Villefort's older daughter, Valentine. And she's doing all this to ensure that sort of all of the money possible concentrates in her own son, who is Villefort's son, but by this second marriage. And Monte Cristo is just totally fine with this. So he encourages this woman to become a poisoner. She's killing all these other people that had nothing to do with Dantes getting thrown in prison. And one of the casualties ends up looking like it's going to be this young girl, Valentine, who is like just this totally innocent belle of society, like absolutely sweet girl. And her only crime is that she was born to this reprehensible guy, Villefort. And so one of the threads we're following is that this young guy, Morel, Maximilian Morel, who Dantes really, really loves, because he had worked for Morel's father originally, and Morel's father was a good guy. So Dantes loves Maximilian Morel. So the backstory, right? So Monte Cristo is totally fine with the fact that Valentine might die until Morel comes to him and says, wait a second, she's the girl that I love. And then all of a sudden Monte Cristo is like, oh my gosh, we have to save Valentine. And that's like a major plot point of the end part of the book. And so it's just this, it is part of Monte Cristo's redemption arc. So it's not just Valentine. He also does come around to like Albert, who's the son of Fernand, who also played a role in throwing him in prison. Albert also doesn't deserve to suffer. And so eventually he's doing things to ensure Albert's happiness and Valentine's happiness. But he wasn't super invested in Albert for like a long time. And then Valentine was really more of the tipping point. And so it was just sort of like, of course, it's this woman, this pure, innocent creature who does that. And of course you didn't value her until you saw her value through another man's eyes. So it's not like an egregious thing, but it was just like, I know this book was written in 1844. It was published in 1844. But, like, Valentine has other value. Can we please see that? So that drove me a little bit crazy. And then the thing that drove me the most crazy, this is the thing, I almost chucked my book across the room when I read this, is Monte Cristo's relationship with Haydee. And Haydee is an Albanian princess who is partly a tool in revenge that he's seeking against Fernand, again, one of the men who got him thrown away in prison on trumped up charges. And Fernand was a key player in the murder of her entire family. And the Count of Monte Cristo tracked her down when she was like 11 and adopted her to be his, he bought her as a slave, but he's also adopted her as a daughter. And that's a very like frank and open thing that he regards her as a daughter. Like that's part of their relationship. And he says that to other people in the book several times, that he's adopted her as his daughter. And oh, did I have a mark? Yes. Okay. So here on page 940, so this is in the chapter Bread and Salt, which is chapter 72. He says about Haydee, she is a slave whom I bought at Constantinople, the daughter of a prince. I have adopted her as my daughter, having no one else to love in the world. So she's his daughter. So then, as a major part of the wrapping up of the book, Monte Cristo comes to realize that she, as is somewhat natural for a teenager who was rescued from desperate circumstances by an extremely wealthy, sexy man, might have a bit of a crush on him. Surprise! And so he, instead of playing the father figure, let's see. Okay, the Count, so she has just fainted because the Count is doing some dramatic stuff. So the Count leant over her and raised her in his arms, and seeing that sweet face pale, those lovely eyes closed, that beautiful form motionless, and to all appearance lifeless, the idea occurred to him for the first time that perhaps she loved him otherwise than a daughter loves a father. Alas, murmured he, with intense suffering, I might then have been happy yet. And sorry, this is on page 1193 in my edition. Chapter called The Meeting, which is chapter 91. So the Count of Monte Cristo is like, oh, this girl really loves me. Maybe we could have a romantic relationship. He's like 50, she's like 19, or maybe 22. I mean, she's like, and I have nothing against an age gap romance. But the problem is that the entire premise of their relationship for like a decade has been father-daughter. And then he's like, or it could not be. And I'm like, that's not how it's supposed to work, dude. You're being a creep. So I almost chucked my book across the room at that point. And then, sure enough, the end of the book is that he and Haydee go off into the sunset to have a romantic, passionate life together, and we never see them again. Which, like, more power to them. That's fine, except that their entire relationship is founded upon this adoptive paternal relationship, right? That's weird. That's weird. So those are my rants. I think I made it through. Yep, I made it through all of my points. So I hope, I don't know. I would love to hear what other people think. Did some of these things that I found a little bit bothersome, did they bother anybody else when you were reading The Count of Monte Cristo? Or were you just able to skate over them as the product of its time? Which again, I loved this book. I gave it a 5-star rating on Goodreads. I think it's a 4.5 star in my personal accounting. Like, it was super, super fun. That doesn't mean that I didn't want to chuck it across the room at one point and found some parts of it annoying. So we're allowed to hate the things we love. So anyway, would love to hear anybody else's take on this book. And I think I've babbled on long enough. If you like this, want to see more content about me ranting about things in old books, I do that occasionally, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks. Bye.